Hey everybody, go ahead and make yourself very comfortable. Today's gonna be a very fun chat. We have Kristin here, who is someone that I'm so excited to introduce you to, and we also have Gus here. We'll do introductions in a little bit. Just go ahead and make yourself comfortable. It feels like we got another really packed house here. We're gonna try to make it as intimate and conversational as possible because, as y'all know, like these, I think webinar does this type of format a disservice. We try to make it as actionable as possible and conversation as possible. So we do expect that chat box under the Zoom webinar chat to light up. So please go ahead and do so. Ask your questions, make your comments. We definitely want to hear. What's up, Kay? Long time no chat. Shout out to Colorado over there. And for those of y'all that are maybe coming like from a previous webinar, my background is different. I'm doing a brief stint right now in Austin, Texas. You got to go treat yourself. We found a safe way to go and travel. And before this, I actually did a getaway cabin. If anyone here ever wants to go away because they're burnt out because of COVID, highly recommend getaway cabins. But as you're making yourself comfortable, I guess I'll tell a story about how I met Kristin. Kristin, like you've been to several of these last webinars, right? You were like a guest.
Absolutely. An engaged guest. I used that chat box.
Yeah, you sure did. And look, Gus, so we thought it was always one, and Gus doesn't even know this. I saved this for this portion of the talk, was that Lindsay Slavey actually from Sunday Dinner was the one that said, you know what, I really, really highly suggest Kristin. She was a great mentor that I had. She would kill it at a leadership talk. And so when we reached out to Kristin immediately was like, yo, I would love to go speak on the webinar platform. And I mean, like we put in a lot of hours on this, huh? You definitely put in a lot of hours, huh, Kristin?
Well, Kenny, you have been an amazing coach. As I told you at the beginning, I work one-on-one primarily with people, and I've been out of the agency business for a couple of years. So doing a big presentation was stretching some new muscles, and you were a great coach. It was really fun to work with you.
Well, likewise. So y'all go ahead. We'll start in about a minute. I see a lot of people still flowing in, and this is going to be an exciting chat, no doubt. And I see some people here that might know you. We see in Andrea Niculescu. So excited for this. KB is the best leader in human. Also, Yas to Getaway. Yeah, you know what's up. Ashley Winkle. Greetings from Phoenix and your former mentee. Can't wait to learn from you this morning. That's awesome. Look at your squad coming out.
Andrea, Ashley, thanks, guys. It's so cool that you're on. I wish I could see you all.
And we have a Gabriela Lopez. Hello from Los Cabos.
Hey, Gab.
And a Sarah Lewinson. Hey, Kristin, good to see your face. Can't wait to learn. Oh, look at you.
Awesome. I love it.
Bringing out the fam. Well, y'all, let's go ahead and get started because, we want to make sure we end on time and also make time for questions. So welcome to another edition of the TSC webinars. The focus of these webinars is to really challenge common thinking. And when we say challenge common thinking, we try to get people that just don't speak, but actually teach on how they redefine the ways they look at success. Because society tends to dictate success is one way. In this particular instance with leadership, usually it's like leadership breeds financial results. This is a little bit different. This goes down to the EQ side of things. And we always try to find the right people that just don't do it for the money, they do it for the passion, and they also do it for the benefit that they can bring to the world. So Kristin, hopefully, the crowd will love what we have today. We've been working on it quite a bit. I personally love it. It's super exciting. So now I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to you. And just to remind everyone, make sure that when you send in your feedback, make sure you address it to all panelists and attendees. So that way, we can all see it and it incites more conversation in the chat room. And if you have any questions, go ahead and shoot them over now. This is meant to be a conversation. But with that being said, Kristin, floor is all yours.
Awesome. Hey, thanks, Kenny and Gus. I love that you guys are doing these. You were right. I've seen Betsy and Mayer and Fred over the last 3 or 4 months, and they've been inspiring. So it's a true honor to be here. And today we're going to talk about leadership, and specifically human leaders. How great leaders spark momentum for their organization, which is a real passion of mine. But before I get into the topic of human leadership, let me just give you a little bit of background. I've had a great ride in the advertising business. Worked for over 30 years, working in agencies from East Coast to West Coast on brands like Nestle, DIRECTV, Fridays, who actually hired me, and I did a stint on the client side as the head of marketing there. I wasn't a great client. I didn't last on the client side. I missed the agency world. I did almost 5 years at Select Resources as well, which is a consulting company that works with agencies and clients, marketers and clients to run agency reviews, compensation benchmarking, training, coaching. And 3 years ago, kind of had a major shift. My husband and I decided we were up for a new adventure, and that meant from a life standpoint and a career standpoint, and we moved to Cabo San Lucas. And that's my dog, Cabo, in the photo. And I started Bloom. I've always had a passion for developing and growing people. And that's really what Bloom is all about. Helping people become their best selves in their careers and in their lives. And that's where leadership comes in. Because leadership isn't only at the office. You can be a leader in life. And I've just been fascinated by the concept and have looked at what leaders that I've had the opportunity to work for, some good, some really great, some not so good. And I've, over the last few years, really been studying it. I think I'd probably be a better leader today after the work I've done and the coaching I've done. But with that being said, one of the quotes I love about leadership is Pete Drucker, who said, "The only thing leaders have in common is that they all have followers." What I think Pete really meant by this is there is not a single prototype of a successful leader. They're all different kinds of leaders. But to be a successful leader, you have to have followers. Why? Followers help you achieve your mission and your purpose. Followers are loyal. Followers want to work hard for you. They stick around. And to be successful, all of those things are critical. Wouldn't you want to have people who really wanted to help you get and create the mission in hand? So why are we even talking about leadership today? There have been hundreds of books, hundreds of articles on the topic. Well, I think we can all relate to the perfect storm that's going on in our world in 2020, from COVID-19 and what it's meant, not only from a fear and health standpoint, but what it's meant in the workplace, going remote. Obviously, social unrest since the murder of George Floyd, and the impact all of this has had on the economy and fears about having a job, being able to pay the rent, being able to take care of my family. And then throw on top the fact that we're 60 days or thereabouts away from an election. It's really a perfect storm. And because of that, there is a spotlight on leadership like never before. People need leaders more than ever right now. In fact, McKinsey Quarterly just came out with an article called The CEO Moment, Leadership for a New Era, what COVID has created and the shifts that CEOs are making. And ironically, and I had not read this until just the other day, but one of the big shifts is more humanity, more need to be building people up during this time. I've spent the last 6 months talking to agency leaders, working with the 4As across the country, both leaders and aspiring leaders. And there have been other studies done. Harvard Business Review's done a study, University of Texas, on the questions and concerns that are coming out of this time from a people standpoint. Things like, what can I do to inspire my team? How can we be creative without those serendipitous water cooler moments? My role has changed. We even heard, is it time to change careers or to retire? Am I the leader my people need me to be? How will the new normal look? And is my current style of leadership working? I don't know how to lead from afar. Well, if I had a silver bullet and could answer all these questions, I would be a wealthy woman. But the reality is there is no silver bullet. But in times of crisis, and it's been said, it's not good to waste a crisis, it's an opportunity. Now is the time to show the world what you're made of and why you are worth following. And that's where human leadership comes in. Human leadership is a concept that I've worked on for a long time, both before I started Bloom and then since Bloom, in terms of what does it take to be an effective leader. And I think it's even more relevant for today. It's 2 simple tenets, simple, not always easy, but simple. The first is you need to know yourself. You need to be true to yourself. People, it's an overused term, but people want authentic. But that's not enough. it's also critical right now, especially in this perfect storm, to know your people. You've all heard of, or most of you I'm sure have heard of the term creating customer intimacy, which is about knowing the needs and values of your customer. Well, now it's not only about customer intimacy, but it's about creating employee intimacy, knowing the needs and values of your employees, because they're there to help you carry out your mission, and they need you, and you need them. So here's an example of somebody that I think may not call it human leadership, but practices human leadership. I don't know who's familiar with Arne Sorensen. I know Betsy brought him up on her LinkedIn webinar. He's the CEO of Marriott. And when COVID first hit, Arne told his close-in advisors he wanted to get on video in front of their giant employee base and talk to them and give them his perspective on what he knew, what he didn't know, how they were going to navigate this world forward. And his advisory team said, Arne, you don't want to be on video. You've got cancer. You're not the guy everybody knows right now. And Arne said, no, that's who I am right now. And it's important for me to be in front of our people right now. And he has continued to be out in front of his people using LinkedIn and video to communicate with transparency, frequency, and candor, which we'll dig into more both as we get through this presentation. But I think he's a great example of human leadership. Because Arne gets what Simon Sinek has said, that leadership is not about being in charge. It's about taking care of the people in your charge. So how do you start practicing human leadership? What are some to-dos and some ways of thinking about it that can help you move forward? Well, there are three things I want to talk about and dig into today. The first are what I call the 3 Ps of human leadership: your performance, your passion, and your persona. But the secret sauce on top of that I really think makes a difference is your emotional intelligence, your EQ or your EI, not your IQ. And third, I'm going to give you a framework or an MBA for human leadership. And if you can remember what's important from a mindset standpoint, a behavior standpoint, and actions, you can and will, and hopefully will, start practicing human leadership. Because ultimately, with chaos comes opportunity. And you have an opportunity right now to relook at how you're practicing leadership, and are you there for the people that need you, and are you as effective as possible driving things forward and inspiring people in a world that needs that inspiration right now. Strong leaders are like strong brands. Both require an investment, and now's the time to invest in you. Because great leaders don't set out necessarily to be a leader, they set out to make a difference. So let's dig in, the 3 Ps. The first is performance. Obviously, if you're running a business or in a leadership position in a business, you've got to drive performance. Your business wouldn't be around if you weren't driving towards performance. And that starts with knowing what you're delivering to the world, knowing what your goals are, knowing where you want to go. But it doesn't stop with just you knowing that. It's key to then be clear on everyone's role in achieving them. Let me give you a quick story. I worked for an agency in the 90s. It was run by 4 partners, all had their names on the door, and it was very successful for a long period. But things started to turn upside down when the 4 partners started to totally disagree on how they wanted to grow the business, the type of clients that we wanted to go after, and that filtered down, and it became chaotic, and unrest ensued. And ultimately, one of the partners left, and the agency was sold, and it is not even around any longer. And the real reason, in my opinion, was lack of alignment, and lack of alignment that filtered down throughout the organization. Conversely, I worked for an agency that's been around for over 100 years, 4 offices at the time. Senior management had been in place for a number of years, and there was a very clear process for how goals were developed, how goals were shared, down in a trickle-down manner throughout the organization. And it worked. We were all clear on what we needed to achieve, and that agency is still going strong. But performance isn't enough. You can have a really successful business, but you may not be making an impact in the world or achieving and moving towards a mission or purpose or what I call passion, because I love the energy in the word passion. And your passion is your why. It's what attracts others. It's that kind of moth to a flame that is what people get inspired by, is your why. Think about this. How often have you been asked at a cocktail party, what do you do? Easy answer. You know, you give your title, where you work, not too difficult to answer, but then they throw you a zinger and say, why do you do what you do? So many people can't answer that because they don't know it for themselves, or they don't even know their organization's why. Here's a story about the power of why that I get chills when I think about it. And it's probably older than many of you are here on the webinar, but Jack Kennedy was president in the early 60s. His title was president. That's what he did. But he had a why and a mission, one of many, but one that got the entire country behind him. He wanted to put a man on the moon. He was down visiting NASA about 5 years before the actual man on the moon happened. And he saw a janitor in the hall. He said to the janitor, what do you do? And the janitor said, I'm helping put a man on the moon. How cool is that? That down to the janitor, he knew his role at NASA wasn't sweeping and cleaning things up. His role was to have a part in the why of our great president. And that's, I think, incredibly powerful. If you're struggling to figure out your why, Simon Sinek is a great resource. Can he jump in and help me talk about this book and how it worked for you guys?
Yeah, this book was incredible. So like we actually had to focus our why in last year. And so the why that we ended up with was to challenge common thinking so that we create a common future. And the book is a really great framework on how to not only get your personal why, but also your why as a business. So for anyone here watching today, is that if you're looking for a way to like bring that out of your organization or for yourself, Simon Sinek has a book called Start With Why, which is the philosophical side of things. You know us, that we love the tactical side of things. Find your why is that tactical piece where you can actually figure out how to bring that best out of you. It's pretty much a framework where basically like, you know, it starts off with the what you want to do for the world and then what the world will become based on what you do. And so it's a brilliant way to do that. We got to tell so many stories as a team. And I'll tell you the most rewarding thing, and I see several team members here that were on that, including I see you, Kara, on here, is that we all told the same stories on our why, but we just never could articulate in the same exact message. But once we can, the intentionality became so freaking clear. So highly recommend this book. Amy, I see you say Start With Why is a phenomenal book. Highly agree. This is a great piece to accompany that, to make it more real, for sure.
Yeah, and there's a great, Simon gives a great TED Talk on the Start With Why as well, which you can find on YouTube. So you're right, it's a great book. You can have a why and you can get behind it and you can have alignment behind it, but what it takes is your persona, how you come forward to the world, how you show up, and how you starts with how you see yourself and present yourself. And it's not just the shoes you wear, but it's everything about you. In fact, it's been said that, you know, words are only a small portion of how you present yourself. It's body language, it's style that is unspoken as well as spoken. And your persona is how you engage with and inspire others. And most importantly, how you build trust. Because if people don't trust you, why would they follow you? Why would they help you achieve your why? Another kind of personal story that I call the tale of two leaders. I worked for an agency in LA that had two leaders, and they basically only cared about making money. The team would come in and want to share work that we had done or a deck that we were getting ready to present to a client. They're like, oh no, it's fine, just go. Come back and tell us how the meeting went. And you know, making money's good. I'm not saying it's not, but that is the driver. With a management team or a manager that I reported to, not even caring what I did, it was incredibly uninspiring. How he showed up didn't make any of us want to show up for him. Conversely, I worked for a leader in LA for almost 10 years, and he was probably one of the toughest bosses I had, challenged me, pushed me, pushed everyone to be their best, and didn't settle for second best. He also cared about his people. On a personal note, I was going through some really tough times that needed some help medically. And he pulled me into his office and said, I am making the appointment for you and I'm taking you. You need this. That's a leader that not only cared about what I was doing and delivering from a work standpoint, but he cared about me from a personal standpoint. That's the difference a persona can make. They both had the same job, but how they showed up, how they engaged, how they inspired trust was so dramatically different. Think about how you're showing up, how you're building trust and inspiring people. Because right now, your persona is even more important during tough times. People want and crave leadership. And there are some basic principles of leadership that are really important and actually need to be dialed up even more in times like today. The first one is listening, giving people what they need, which only starts when you know what they need. You know, think back to the beginning of COVID. People's needs were so different than they are today. They were worried about where they want to work. Did they have a computer at home? Where do I put a desk? I don't have a separate space for an office. And companies had to hear that and listen to it and help get people ready to work. Moving through COVID, the challenges changed. It was like, how do I create separation from work and life? I'm rolling out of bed to my computer and there's just no balance whatsoever. And the good leaders listened and heard that and tried to put some boundaries around how many Zoom calls a day or how many phone calls and when do we stop working? But they wouldn't have known that if they didn't listen. And because you weren't all in the same office, it took reaching out and asking those questions. Secondly, it's about communication, clearly, simply, frequently. I talked about Arnie Sorensen a moment ago, and I heard from a lot of leaders, you know, how do I know how often I should be out in front of my people? Often. And even if you're thinking you're repeating the message, that's okay. It doesn't always sink in, and they need and want to see you and hear from you if you're a leader. But what you say is critical. Choose candor over charisma. People can smell bullshit a mile away. They don't necessarily expect you to have all the answers, but they need you to be honest and show up with what you do know and what you're doing to try to figure out the unknown. Here's a framework for thinking about choosing candor in your feedback. First, it starts with assessing the situation. What's your message? What do you want people to feel? The desired outcome of whatever conversation you're going to have on a broad scale or even on a one-on-one scale. Be timely. Have the conversation in real time. Arnie didn't wait for months to figure out what was going to happen with COVID. He got out in front of his people right away and kept getting out in front of his people. Third, this is where candor comes in. Be specific, be direct, but know your audience. Have empathy what they're going through so that you can be heard most clearly with your message. And finally, follow up, especially when you're delivering a message on video or via Zoom. You don't know, you're not reading body language in the same way. People may not raise their hand in a Zoom call. So reach out and check back in with individuals to find out if they're understanding what your message was and what you wanted them to hear. Listen for input, because that gives you the clue to how to start the framework again of when you next need to communicate. What's the new situation? How do you be timely, et cetera, et cetera. So in summary, those things that really help you know you, but help you connect with other people are the 3 Ps of human leadership. Obviously, performance is critical because you've got to drive business results, but you're going to get excitement around going in that direction if you've got a why and a passion. And it's your persona that's going to bring that to life to the people around you. You may all call them something different, but I'm just curious, and I can't see the chat line right now, but do you know your 3 Ps? Could you articulate them? And if so, what do you think is the most important? Any comments, questions?
Yeah, this is where we want to hear from y'all is like, you know, oh, look, right there, Kara's still passion. You know, I think passion's most important. Yeah, if anyone here knows what their 3 Ps is, like, please share. Like, I know, like, my passion here is like, it really goes down deeply to the mission. Is like, I resonate very deeply with that. But I've always told myself, like, I want to help more people than I've ever met so that I have a friend anywhere in the world. That's always been like my driving passion. Kristin, what's yours? Just curious.
You know, ultimately, I found it with Bloom. I really love helping people become their best selves, to bring out what they may not see in themselves and for themselves. That's why I love what I'm doing right now. You know, back when I was at Deutsch, it was a little different. I think your passions can change. You know, when I joined Deutsch as employee number one, everyone told us an East Coast agency couldn't make it in LA. And so our passion for that office was to prove everybody wrong. And maybe that's, you know, to go after a negative may not be the right thing, but it got us inspired to say we can do this in a different way than those other East Coast agencies that tried to make it in LA. So your passions may evolve, it may shift. You may join a company because you want to be aligned with their passion. And that's cool, because you can help help an organization to get there if you're inspired, because that's what it takes.
Yeah, it seems like we got some good feedback here.
Yeah, we have a question directly related to so I think the passion and the person side. So from Andrea, the question is, I'm in a violent agreement about the concept of knowing yourself, but many times that's much easier than said and done. So Kristin, what has been particularly effective in your life on that front to dig in and figure that piece out, finding out about yourself?
Well, we're going to get into that in a moment, Andrea, in emotional intelligence. But before I kind of preview the next section of slides, I think overall, it's first being willing to be honest with yourself, being willing to say, what do I know? What do I don't know? What do I want to know? And being able to take the blinders off and look and say, what are the goods and the bads? And because we all have not good parts of ourselves, but it starts with really being willing to be honest, willing to take the blinders off and realize we're all human, and that's okay.
And then Andrea, there's an awesome framework, like a really specific framework that Kristin's about to talk through too, which, yeah, thanks everyone in the comments for talking through. I think passion by far is the thing that everyone's excited about sharing in this group.
Well, that is, and again, some people call it purpose or mission. I love the word passion because it brings energy to it. And that's why I use that P versus purpose in this framework. But as I said at the beginning, there's kind of a secret sauce that I think is really important, especially as it relates to how do I know myself and how do I most effectively bring my persona forward into the world. And that's your emotional intelligence. Not your IQ, but your EQ. It's another defining characteristic of great leaders is strong emotional intelligence. The concept came to be in the early 90s, but it really kind of got into the limelight in 1995 when Daniel Goleman wrote a book of the same name called Emotional Intelligence. Since then, there have been hundreds of books written on the subject, articles in Harvard Business Review, McKinsey, workbooks that you can buy at Barnes and Nobles or on Amazon. So what is emotional intelligence? It's a person's ability to identify emotions in both themselves and others, to recognize the powerful effect of those emotions, and to use that information to inform and guide your behavior. Well, why is it important? It sounds kind of manipulative, but no, it really is about you knowing yourself well enough and knowing the impact you have on others so that you can bring your persona to life in a way that engages, inspires, and builds trust with people. There have been a lot of studies on the topic in terms of why it's important. Goleman himself did a major study with over 200 large global firms, and he looked at the ratio of technical skills, IQ, and EQ amongst all levels. And emotional intelligence proved to be 2 times as effective in terms of predicting outstanding performance and effective leadership as over the other 2. And it wasn't just among leaders. Strong emotional intelligence can make an impact on how you do your job at any level. So what is it? Like, what are the components of EI? Well, there are 5 key components. Self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and social skills. And I'll highlight these right now, and if you request the workbook or do the to-do, they'll be included in that as well. Self-awareness is really knowing your own emotions, knowing your own values and their impact on others. How are you able to know what you're feeling at a given time? Are you able to assess, like, I'm either nervous or I'm scared or I'm out of alignment with my values and that's what is making me stressed out? It's being able to be aware of those feelings inside yourself, those values that you have, and being able to then act on what you need to do to get back in alignment. Self-regulation is the ability to control negative or disruptive impulses. Think of a leader, or maybe it was a parent in your life, who at the drop of a hat could blow up. Just, you didn't know when it was going to happen, but something happened and all of a sudden threw their fist down on the table, threw a glass, whatever it was. They had no ability to regulate those disruptive emotions. First of all, you need to know, are you that type of person? And then you need to get in touch with what are the triggers for that happening and how can you control those? Your motivation is your why. Why do you do what you do? What motivates you? What excites you? It's a passion for the work itself. Generally, if you're going to your job and the only motivation is money, it probably won't have that same long-lasting fulfillment or impact on you. Versus if you have a why that's, as Kenny described with Simon's book, is giving others good as well as yourself. Empathy is how you consider other people when you're making decisions. It's not about getting everybody to agree with you or like you, but it's thinking about where they're coming from, the context of what's going on in their lives, so that they can better hear the message that you're trying to put out. Because if you understand that context, that empathy, then empathy comes into play and they'll be able to hear the message you're delivering in a much more effective way. And finally, social skills. Social skills is your ability to manage people, to move them in the direction you want. It's part of your persona. It's how you inspire people, how you engage with them, how you build trust. And so these 5 things are really the key components of emotional intelligence. It's a lot to remember. I call them your arms. You build muscle with your arms in the gym. Well, you use your ARMES or your arms to build your emotional intelligence. And we'll get into how are some ways you can both assess yourself and build some of these components of emotional intelligence.
We have a question coming in that I wanted to see if you would,
Sure.
on the storytelling side. So Amy Adams mentioned living overseas was great training for her own EQ. And the question is, how has you, being an expat, how's that contributed to your EQ now living not in the United States?
No, that's a great question. And I know I have one of my Cabo friends on the call. She may jump in and disagree with me, but part of it is I'm in a different country and it's not my home country. And it's my job to respect that and to open myself up to basically maybe being uncomfortable sometimes with things not being done the American way or the way I was used to. In Mexico, mañana is a real thing. It may not happen when you want it to happen, it may be mañana. And that was frustrating when we first moved down here. But we had to open up and be aware of empathy with the people whose country we were living in. And so it has absolutely helped me recognize it's a different culture. And you know what, maybe a different culture, but if you're on the agency business, you have those situations happen every time you win a new client. They have different cultures. You have to learn what their culture is all about, how to best communicate in a way that they'll hear you. So, whether it's a different country, a new client, new company that you're working for, it's a great way of kind of building or stretching those muscles from an arm standpoint for sure.
Arm muscles. That's awesome. I love how it worked out. Thank you for answering.
I'm just going to give a couple of examples of leaders who have harnessed their emotional intelligence, in my opinion. I don't profess to know these people personally, but as I said, I studied leaders and I love these 2 examples. The first is Indra Nooyi, who was the former chairman and CEO of Pepsi. She's Indian, and this actually happened to her and her parents when she was home, and she brought it back to Pepsi. She wrote more than 400 letters each year to the parents of her senior executives, thanking them for their child, how they raised them, how they brought them into the world because of the great job they're now doing in their roles at Pepsi. She would get letters back. My God, this is the best thing that's happened to my parents. And it's the best thing that's happened to me. This was a really great way of showing appreciation and recognizing that appreciating you is one thing, but appreciating your parents, wow, what power. And it's behavior like this, emotional intelligence, that shows she's recognizing the importance of her own people, employee intimacy, if you will, that probably led to her strong in-house approval ratings. Jeff Weiner, recently retired CEO at LinkedIn. This is a story I love because Jeff is somebody who acknowledged that he had bad EQ, that he wasn't doing a great job. He tells a story of how when he was around 30, bought the book, The Art of Happiness. And he really liked the concepts. And he put it on his bedside table and it sat there. And it wasn't until later when someone who he worked for said, Jeff, you lead with fierce intelligence, but with a blunt instrument. And Jeff realized that was a nice way of saying the way he was leading is my way or the highway. He didn't care what anybody else thought. It was only about what Jeff thought. And he realized he needed and wanted to make a change. And he pulled back out The Art of Happiness and really worked hard to build empathy and to bring that into his leadership style. And he even took it one step further and he said, I don't just lead with empathy. I lead with compassion, which in my world, this is Jeff talking, compassion is empathy plus action. So I just think that's such a great story of someone who recognized, knew themselves, was open to feedback that he hadn't seen in himself. I'd love to hear if anybody has any leaders that you know of personally, professionally, out in the world that you think have strong EQ. Anybody? Otherwise, I'll keep going, but I'd love to hear. I'm always looking.
Yeah, let's hear from the room. Like who comes to mind? The one I'm thinking of, you already said Arnie, but Ed Bastian is really great from Delta. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a person that leads from his heart and it's just super real and transparent. I do believe when they're very open about how much money they've lost and they're willing to lose more by sending all those doctors to those countries that need help for free. I mean, that shows you look, we're just going to do the right thing. And when those good things come, that's just a byproduct of doing the right thing.
We have some folks saying Mark Benioff, Stephen Tristan, the young CMO at Poshmark, Jen Say from Levi's, which I've seen her speak in the way that she leads. That's
awesome.
All awesome examples.
Thanks, guys. I'm always looking because I think you can learn from the actions of other strong leaders, the things that you can bring into your own human leadership practice. I said that I work for Deutsch, and I have huge respect for Donnie as a leader of an agency. And yet he told our senior leadership team at one point when I was in New York that if we're looking to hire somebody that we think isn't all that perfect, but we can change them just by bringing them into Deutsch, he said, don't do it. His view was, if you're 25, you're not going to change anymore. You're not able to move in a new direction. Well, I think we just saw with Jeff Weiner that is bullshit. And I didn't disagree with Donnie a lot, but that was one instance where I did. And even Daniel Goleman has said that you can build your emotional intelligence, but it cannot and will not happen without sincere desire and concerted effort. Think about it. If you decide you want to have abs, you want that six-pack, you don't go to the gym once and say, magic, they're here. You've got to go with consistency, with commitment, and a real desire to say, I'm going to stick with this. Because even Ralph Waldo Emerson said, nothing great was ever achieved without enthusiasm. So how do I know, this is a question that was asked earlier, how do I know kind of where I am on emotional intelligence? There are actually lots of different tests out there. There's not one single standard measure. There are tests that use self-assessment as the primary measure. There are tests that use peer assessment, and there are tests that use ability, or a combination. I'm not going to get into that. I'm not an expert on the testing. What I am focused on and do work with people on is how can you, on a more simple level, assess yourself, get some feedback, and start to build your arms. So first is starting with yourself. This is a chart, might be a good screenshot. It will also be in the handbook that lays out the 5 components that I talked about a moment ago, the arms: self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and social skills on the left. The definition of that quality or that component is in the middle column. But then to help you kind of think about yourself, there's some hallmarks listed on the right. For example, self-awareness. Some of the key hallmarks of a person with strong, good self-awareness is they're confident, they're comfortable with themselves. They're able to take off the blinders and know they're not perfect, know where they've got some work they need to do. They're able to laugh at themselves, which is really important because, you know, if we take ourselves too seriously, it puts a wall up between you and other people. And finally, they have a thirst for constructive criticism. They're open and wanting to hear and learn and grow. Another one, self-regulation. I won't go through all of these. We talked about the person who never knew, you never know what person you're going to get if they're going to blow up. Well, hallmarks of someone with self-regulation as a strength are trustworthiness, first and foremost. Think about this. If you don't know who's going to show up, why would you trust them? If you don't know what you're going to get, the nice person or the mean person, that just depletes trust. Integrity is another component kind of hand in hand with that. And the third is comfort with ambiguity and change. Why is that a hallmark of this? Well, a lot of times the blow-ups from people who can't regulate their emotions happen with something, when something is thrown in front of them that they didn't expect. Or, you know, you bring the deck in and it's not what they wanted, and it's their, or the clients change their mind, and that's when they blow up. Somebody who is able to self-regulate their emotions is able to deal with that, is okay when things aren't crystal clear, or when something changes on a dime. Again, this chart will be in the workbook, but it's a great starting point to think on a 1 to 10 scale. How would you rate yourself? 1 being not so good, 10 being, you know, I think I got this, I'm pretty good. But given that emotional intelligence involves how others perceive you and how you interact with others, I think it's also a really good idea to get feedback. And here's an exercise you can do. Pick 2 or 3 people that work for you, that know you well, that you trust will be honest with you. And print this out, this list of questions. How would you describe me? Do you see me being open? Are you afraid of me? And ask them to jot down their answers in as honest a way as possible, and tell them that you want them to be honest. You're wanting their candor. And before you regroup with them, answer the questions for yourself. Then invite them for a cup of coffee, one-on-one, and compare notes. It's great when you see alignment. That's awesome. You know, wow, they describe me just as I would describe myself. I see my problem-solving approach the same way they see how I solve problems. The real learning comes from when you look for gaps. When you say, here's how I see myself, and they see you in a totally different way. If you start to get consistent input on that from more than one person, that gives you a clue that maybe that's an area, an arm you need to build. An area that how you're putting yourself forward, your persona, isn't coming through in the way you intend. It's a really great exercise. Another part of emotional intelligence is being open to alternate points of view. Being able to, you know, I talked about Jeff Weiner, it's my way or the highway. It's amazing what you can learn when you actually let other people tell you how they're thinking. And if that's hard for you, or if you think people might not trust that you really mean you want to hear their feedback, try this one on. This is, there's a book written by a guy named Edward de Bono back in 1985, and it's called 6 Hats Thinking. And it's a great exercise to try with a team if you've got a problem to solve, or a new product you're evaluating, or just a situation in general. And you basically ask everybody to come into the room or into the Zoom call, and you assign different color hats. And one person's got the white hat, one person's got the blue hat, the green, the red, etc. And you're only allowed to talk about the problem, the issue, the new product, based on your color of hat. For example, you're the white hat. All you get to talk about are the facts. What do we know? What do we need to find out? What objective information and data do we have? But if you're wearing the red hat, you get to talk about gut, hunches, instincts, no rationale needed at all. The black hat, the hat of doom, gets to talk about weaknesses, risks, difficulties, dangers. The advantage of this game is A, it frees people up to maybe be able to talk about things that they wouldn't have brought up to the group at large because of the concept of groupthink. Gotta do what the group wants me to do. It also shows your people that you're open to hearing different points of view. And it's amazing when you are able to evaluate a problem from this kind of well-rounded perspective, how you can get to an answer you may not have even thought possible. So I challenge you as a to-do, try this on with your team. Another opportunity to build empathy is to turn questions into story opportunities. For example, think if somebody's ever come up to you and said, "Why'd you do that?" Well, if they did that to me, immediately my walls go up. I go on the defensive, partly because of their tone of voice, but partly because it sounds like they think I did it wrong. But if instead you said, "Tell me more about how you made this decision. I'll give you where it's working for me and we can talk about where it's not working for me." That allows you to get inside a person's head. It allows you to learn about how their train of thought was working, and it takes them off the defensive. Another example, if you ask somebody, "Were you frustrated by that meeting or that conversation?" Well, that's a yes/no question, and you might just get a yes/no answer. And what a missed opportunity. Instead, think about saying, "Tell me how you felt after that meeting or that conversation. What worked for you? What didn't work for you? Where you think there are holes?" Get them to bring you into their thinking. It builds empathy, it builds trust, and bonus, you may learn something. So in summary, between the exercise from a self-assessment standpoint, peer assessment standpoint, asking for feedback, looking for new perspectives, seeking to understand by asking better questions, all ways that you can work on your arms, work on your EQ. Any questions before I keep going? I challenge you to try it on, to make it a to-do, at least one of these exercises. I'm going to end on the MBA for human leadership. Talked about the 3 Ps, emotional intelligence. If you can remember what your mindset needs to be practicing human leadership, kind of overall behavior and your actions, you'll be on your way. Your mindset is really, again, to focus on your 3 Ps. Be able to articulate them, believe in them, and make sure they're known by others around you. Because if you know them and you know them, they're not going to come to life. But you have to believe in them because that's what it takes to have others believe in you. So to recap, think about your performance. What do you and your team deliver to the world? Is everybody clear on their roles? Passion, why you do what you do. What drives you? Do the people on your team, down to the receptionist, know what their role is and know what they're contributing to the why? And persona, it's kind of how you build trust, how you inspire. Kenny actually gave me this question. Is the way you act the way you'd like to be described at your eulogy? I know that's kind of depressing, but it actually made me think. Quick aside, I had just turned 30, a few years before Kenny did, and was leading my first big team. I was a senior vice president, and I had a lot of people reporting to me. And I got self-reflective. That's what those birthdays do to you, those big ones. And I realized if I were to die tomorrow, my tombstone would say she worked hard. And it was incredibly depressing because I realized I was focused on only me. I was focused on the work in front of me and the results that we needed to do. I wasn't even thinking about, and it made me uncomfortable for a reason, because those weren't my values. I wasn't thinking about the people and what I needed to do to inspire others who could help us reach our goals. And that's just a very powerful way to think about and self-assess your own persona. It led me, I know, to look at my values and to remember and rephrase kind of how I was living them. And it's important, if you know your values, to live them in authenticity and to communicate them. Let people know what's important to you and what you believe in, because then you'll be letting them in on a human level. This is an unattributed quote, but I think it's so true. The greatest value you have as a leader is your authenticity. When we follow you around the corner, we don't expect you to be perfect. We expect you and want you to be consistent. That's that self-regulation thing again, in your arms, coming to life. Don't throw me a curveball and be a different person every time you show up or when something goes wrong. Behavior and actions, you could say, aren't they the same thing? Well, behavior is kind of more big picture. It's your values. It's kind of the way you live. Your actions are intentional. It's what you do every day. It's how you show up. And this is where you get to demonstrate employee intimacy, to listen and work to understand your employees, just like you do your customers. Human leadership actually requires you take on the behavior of a good coach. It's not about having all the answers, as I said a moment ago, but it's about building empathy and trust with your actions. And as a coach, that's what I try to do with people is I don't and can't answer what's inside them for them, but it's about asking good questions. Here are 5 keys to having a more productive one-on-one conversation. We've touched on some of these. And these are, again, a challenge, a to-do, to think about, can you try these on as you're having one-on-ones with your team? First of all, don't ask yes/no questions. It just stops the opportunity to let people tell you their reasoning and for you to learn. 2, stay away from I need you to do that. That's very directive and it takes away empowerment and power from the other person. Try on, I trust you can handle this. Will you take care of it? 3rd, I have feedback. We talked about that a moment ago. It can sound ominous. It can shut people down. Try on, here's my reaction to that, to whatever X was. Here's where it worked for me. Here's where it didn't work for me. Let's talk about it. 4th, good job is a great opening to a productive conversation. When you start on a positive, people open their ears. They're ready to hear you. You can build on it then by what worked, what didn't work. You can go into some constructive input. But if you open their ears up by starting off on a positive note, they're going to be more receptive to what you have to say. And finally, great coaching conversations can also work for you. I challenge all of you to end your conversations, a coaching conversation, with asking somebody for asking the person for feedback, to give you feedback. What would you like me to start doing, stop doing, for example? Again, it empowers them, builds empathy with them, and it allows you to become a better leader by what you learn. Ultimately, it's about respecting the people that are on your team. Because if you treat an individual as he or she is, he will remain how he is. But if you treat him as if he were what he ought to be and could be, he will become what he ought to be and could be. And that is so awesome. So that is a key element of your persona, your arms, and human leadership, is treating people with respect. Building on some to-dos, here are 5 daily leadership behaviors that you can start tomorrow or try on that are even more important today in the era and perfect storm that we're in. 1, check in with your people, not just on their work, but on their lives. Call or email at least 1 team member a day on a human basis. Ask them how their kids are. How's their husband? What's going on at home? It's powerful. And if you don't know who you should call, ask your direct reports. Is anybody on their team going through something that it would make a difference or mean something if you picked up the phone and touched base? It doesn't have to be a long conversation. It can even be a text that says, I'm thinking about you. 2, the power of thank you. Praise somebody, say thank you, and do it genuinely. And be specific. Let them know it's not just one of those passing in the hallway, hey, thanks, you did a great job. But thanks, I really liked how you did this or how you impacted that. That is incredibly powerful for your people, and it's creating employee intimacy. 3rd, great leaders have a thirst for criticism. It's part of self-awareness, part of your arms. Seek out criticism. Ask somebody to tell you something that you may not want to hear. Frame it like that. What do you think I don't want to hear? I'd love to hear it today. Or have that start-stop conversation. And ultimately, always thank somebody for candor. Let them know it's okay that they were honest with you, because that'll build that habit. Practicing gratitude. Celebrate wins. You know, if you are grateful as a leader or as an individual, it shines and emanates out. And however you practice gratitude, and there's no one right way, meditating, journaling, going for a walk, a run, the gym, you may not even realize how that energy is imparted to the people around you. And if there's a win that involves others, celebrate it, share it. I know people are getting tired of the Zoom happy hours. I have a friend who's taken to sending lunch over to a family as a thank you, or a bottle of wine. Finally, give input now. If you've been struggling with somebody who's not doing their job or has a performance input, it's really easy to say, I'll deal with that later. No, have the conversation now. Great story, and I know we're getting close to time, so I'll try to make this quick. Sheryl Sandberg and Kim Scott. Sheryl obviously is at Facebook. Kim Scott is the author of a book named Radical Candor. But well before that book was out and published, and she worked for Sheryl. Gave a presentation one day as she tells the story, and Sheryl came up to her afterwards and said, "You said a lot." Kim kind of walked on by and said, "Yeah, but the presentation went great, right?" Kim said it again. She didn't hear. Sheryl said it again. She finally said, "Kim, you are not hearing me. You saying as often as you did makes you sound stupid." And it took that for Sheryl to say, you know what, she's right. And it took that for her to say, there's something in this idea of radical candor, really being honest, but doing it with empathy and kindness. Brene Brown says it in a different way. Clear is kind, unclear is unkind. Buy the book from Kim. I know Kenny and Gus can relate to this because radical candor is one of their core values of 368, but it's a really powerful tool in human leadership, because human leadership isn't about always being nice. It's about being honest and helping people grow. Just to end on, human leadership starts at the top, but there are organizations that are driven and could be called human leadership organizations. Comparably does studies across the web on a variety of topics. They just came out with their best leadership teams amongst large companies as rated by employees. Some companies that we all know and love, but what I found most fascinating were some of the quotes that came out of people who took the study. Things like at Google, they said about their leadership, they're super humble, very caring, zero pride. T-Mobile, the leadership team not only supports and emphasizes company goals, but also personal goals. Zoom, they're actually involved. They're in there hopping on the chat and being a part of the team. Which leads me to 5 qualities of human leadership organizations. They stand for something that inspires everyone. They know their why. And individuals know they can make an impact no matter the level of their job. Kenny told me a story about Pixar. The day you get hired at Pixar, when you're going through your orientation, whether you're the barista or the janitor, they tell you, welcome to being a filmmaker. Because whatever your role or job at the company is, you're all a part of making films that Pixar puts out. Just like the janitor who's a part of putting a man on the moon. That's how you inspire people. 3, leadership is present, involved, and engaged. Even more important today when people don't just walk by and see you in your office, you've got to make a conscious effort to hop on the Zoom call or to reach out. Employee and customer intimacy are practiced. Don't just value your customers. It's about valuing your people. And on that note, human leadership organizations know that they've got to develop people development as a core value. Because as we started with, the only thing leaders have in common is they all have followers, people who help them accomplish their mission. Well, Tom Peters also said, leaders don't create followers. They actually create more leaders. And I'm going to end on a final thought that came out of Jeff Wiener's goodbye speech or final speech at LinkedIn, and it's the concept of Ubuntu, which is an African term loosely derived to mean humanity. Or a more literal translation is, I am because we are. And Jeff said in his final speech, I can't think of a better way to describe my extraordinary journey with all of you over the last 11 and a half years. I am because we are. That thought embodies human leadership. So in addition to the to-dos I've thrown out throughout this presentation, if you want to get the human leadership workbook that Bloom has put together, I challenge you to take a photo of this screenshot and put it on your desk, on your desktop, or on your bulletin board in front of your desk to remind you to practice these behaviors on a daily basis. And email me the photo and give me an example of one of the things you did after this conversation today. My email is at the bottom of the slide. And I know I'm rushing a bit because I think we're hitting time, but it's been a tremendous honor and to be here today. I welcome any questions, but again, thanks Kenny and Gus, and thank all of you for showing up.
Yeah, and thank you for like this awesome session. If you can go back one slide, Kristen, so like people can take a photo of it. This is your to-do. So for those of y'all that want that workbook, you totally do, because one, it's the ARMS framework in there. Be sure to take the time, screenshot this now and send it to Kristen. Take that first step, because this isn't the philosophical stuff. This is something that you can do every day to make yourself a better human leader. Gus, I think we have like one or two questions. You want to send it over to Kristen?
Yeah, so we have a question from Taylor Fairbanks, which is, what are some ways that you guard you as a human leader and not fall back into old, inhuman habits of the past?
That's really where self-awareness comes in. And it's also where practicing these behaviors daily, just like any muscle that you're trying to build. If you go to the gym once a week, you're not going to build your abs. If you go to the gym every day, you're going to start to build that six-pack. Same thing is true with building your emotional intelligence, building your human leadership behavior. You can't just say, I'll go in this half-assed. You got to commit. You got to go all in. And actions are the way, start to practice the actions are the way you won't slip back in. And if you do, you're human. That's okay. Acknowledge you had a bad day and put back on the cloak of human leadership the next day and do something good for your team. A thank you, a check-in, a whatever, and start to build back up. That's how you don't slip into bad habits, is practicing the behaviors consistently.
That's awesome. We have another question, which I think is a pretty practical question as well. Do you have a rule personally for when you share too much or just the right amount? How do you determine the difference between too much personal info that's shared with your team?
That's a great question, and I think it varies for everyone. I think, you have to remember who is hearing you, and you don't want to lose their confidence. You don't want, to have them concerned that you're not capable of leading because you're panicked about the future of the business, or, you don't want to share that you're going through potentially a giant crisis at home, that you're not going to be able to show up every day in the same way. But that being said, I used to have a practice that if I was having a bad day, I actually acknowledged it when I got into the office in the morning. So people didn't think that my self-regulation was off when I wasn't as engaged as I could be. And I'd say, guys, I woke up on the wrong side of the bed today, and I'm just going to acknowledge it, and forgive me if I'm not as sharp or as present as I may normally be. By doing that, it takes the power away from the bad day too. I generally got over it faster because I let it out. So I think there's no fine line or formal rule on, should I not talk about my marriage or should I not talk about my kids? You're human, so you will talk about those things, but think about, is it moving away from people trusting me or believing in me if I go too far?
Mm-hmm.
Very true. I see another question. How do you handle feedback that you're being too empathetic?
Interesting. I'm not sure what too empathetic means. If you're taking empathy into a means of, or into the land of, I'm so concerned about how you're going to think or feel that you move away from your values or your purpose because you're trying to please someone, that's a sign you're taking empathy too far. It's not about being so concerned with how someone else is going to take your message that you change who you are. And if you're doing that, then you are taking empathy too far.
Very true. Yeah. It's also when you kind of flow into that, like, I want to be liked, ruinous empathy.
Exactly. And you know what? Great leaders may be liked, but that's not what's important to them. It's about, do they inspire? Are they respected? Are they trusted? It's not about whether you like them or not. That's like, is she nice? You know, or is he nice? It's a shallow characteristic that isn't really going to take you to where you want to be from driving change or driving towards a mission or a purpose or a passion.
Very true. And now with that being said, I think it's time to close. But, you know, one thing that kept coming to mind is like, you know, you said ARMS earlier, and that was such a great acronym and framework. And I'm thinking now, like, you have to go to the gym pretty often to work on your arms, right? Instead of your abs. And like now though, that's like in my mind is like, you know,
Ed?
yeah, it's stuck in my head now. And that was such a great way to put it. I'm sure that you're going to read the comments here. It seems like everyone loved today's like webinar and training. We're super excited to have you here. And like, y'all, please don't forget to like follow up so you can get the workbook. That's definitely something that you want. I want personally. So thank y'all so much for making it out today. You got any closing thoughts as we are signing out, Kristin?
No, I just, you know, if I gave you some things to think about and more importantly to do from a leadership standpoint, then I'm happy. And it was an honor to be able to be here today. I thank Kenny and Gus for this platform that they're doing, which has been incredibly inspiring with all of the speakers. So it's been an honor to be here. And thanks everybody for participating.
Thank you, Kristin and Gus. Thanks for your help. And you might have saw a cameo from Nick earlier, our CTO. He jumped on the Zoom account. Yeah, I was like, are we going to not address that? I want to make sure I address that with everyone that was like, who's that random that just jumped in the room? Did they just get hacked? No, that was our CTO jumping in. They had to switch out. So I think y'all all. Yeah, it was totally. Yeah, totally a Zoom bomb. But thank y'all so much, fam. We'll see y'all soon. We got a couple more great webinars lined up for the year. And as always, we'll make sure we'll cut the philosophical stuff and we'll make sure there's a lot of tactical stuff because it's all about taking action. So with that being said, have a great day. Have a great weekend. We'll see y'all again soon. Take care, y'all.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Kenny. Thanks, Gus.
Thanks, Kristin.